If you can't jumpstart your car by linking your batteries, is it really a dual battery system? Most people think that dual battery systems are just there to run the extra accessories, like your fridge, your lights, things like that. When in actual fact, a proper dual battery system does so much more. Stay tuned as we deep dive into batteries so you can get the most out of your dual battery system, different types of setups, battery types, pros and cons, do's and don'ts, and avoid making these mistakes so you don't end up with ESI. Now that's the bad case for ESI. Are you ready? There are 3 different types of battery setups. Which system you need really depends on what you are trying to do with the vehicle. For example, if you get talked into doing the ultimate battery system, it could cost you the same amount as going halfway around Australia on a lap. Wants and needs are very different. Are you making a weekender? Or are you towing? Towing is a big question. Because if you're towing, the trailer probably suits all those needs. Or are you building a home on wheels? With that in mind, let's look at the difference between these battery systems. The first one being the classic and basic, followed by the house battery, modern or old school. Finally, the ultimate setup. This is for house on wheels or for people who work out in the bush and actually need all that power, like professional photographers, videographers, things like that. Starting with the classic and basic. All that is 2 batteries in the front of your vehicle, under the bonnet. That's where they live. The second battery's main purpose is to jumpstart the car, so you got to back up in the bush, to power a fridge, maybe a couple of lights in the back, and assist you with the heavy loads of winching and driving lights, should you have that. Moving to the house battery, this is more simple than your classic and basic, even though it says house setup, because the main purpose of the house battery, you got 1 battery in the front, which is a crank battery, that sends a wire down to the back to a DC-DC charger, which powers the house battery. Now the house battery can either be AGM or it can be lithium. So you got old school and you got modern. If you go old school, you're limited, maybe a fridge, maybe some lights, maybe a small inverter because the battery's right there, you can use it at the back. But if you go lithium, you can use so many more things and you got more use out of that battery, but the price also goes up. But it can also be cost effective compared to the AGMs because they'll outlast it, but we'll get to more of that stuff a bit later in this feature. The ultimate modern setup, house on wheels. You are traveling around Australia, you're going to remote locations. You want to have 2 batteries in the front, so you've got your backup starting and you've got your assisting loads on your lights and maybe your winching. That's all that battery does. It doesn't do anything else. In the back, however, you have a lithium house battery that powers your inverters, powers your fridge, powers your lights. Would usually have solar charging, all kinds of capabilities to keep that battery topped up. You are living on the road, you're living out of this vehicle. You may have meat in the fridge you cannot afford to spoil. Most people don't need this setup. So unless you are a photographer, a videographer, worker with lots of power tools out in the bush, or you're building a dream home on wheels, those are the 4 reasons why you would go that setup. Most people don't need that setup. Look at a classic or the house battery. But wait, there is one more. Simplest and easiest dual battery you can get.
For simplicity's sake, just running 2 cranks in parallel. I don't really camp for that long, I'm sort of always on the move.
Basically plonking in a second battery and then linking them up parallel. Although I don't recommend it because there's no isolation between them. Everything's gonna run off the 2 batteries. Yes, you've got more power, you can run fridges and things like that off it, but they will drain at the same rate, they will charge at the same rate. If one battery is compromised, that means the other one is also going to be reduced to the same amount of charge. So I do not recommend that type of setup. A pity the Ford doesn't have a dual battery system. Are you ready? Driving loads versus low current loads. High current driving loads include driving lights, your winch, your compressor. The biggest mistake I see with any battery type, any battery system setup, when people are running driving lights or driving loads like winches and things like that off the secondary battery or even the third battery, all driving loads must come off the crank battery because the alternator is going to assist in powering it. So picture you're driving at night with all your lights on. Lights add up to a lot of current. And when you are driving at night, it's not too bad because the alternator is making up for it. When you're idling, all those lights will more than likely be draining your battery current slightly. Never put that load onto your auxiliary battery because these high current loads are designed for your crank battery. Your crank battery can handle high current and your alternator will assist it in providing that current. The same goes with winching. always run your winches off your crank battery. Never ever run your winches off your auxiliary battery. The auxiliary battery is just there to run low current. Fridges, lights, like camping lights, not your driving lights. With the exception of a lithium battery, of course, you can run high capacity inverters. You can also run compressors, which draw a lot of power. So again, run all driving loads off the crank battery. Do not run any driving loads off the auxiliary battery. Here's a list of, if you don't ask, you don't get. Yes, you will have to pay a little bit more for these things, but you are saving yourself work and you're also saving money from having people to do it again afterwards, because as you're getting a dual battery system installed, regardless of which one it is, here is a list of things you need to ask for. A wire run to the rear of the vehicle. So if you have a classic dual battery setup with the two in the front, you would want a wire to run to the rear to run your fridges or anything else at the back. Make sure you ask for that, because if they've got to do it later, you got to pay for it later. While they got everything out, might as well put it in. The battery jump start. If you don't ask for that, you are not going to get it. And that's one of the most important things with a battery. You got two batteries here, you might as well utilize the safety net of jump starting your battery. Start the car, that's fine. Battery link, off we go. Insurance. Believe it or not, many people, they will ask for a dual battery system, but they don't specify what type of battery, and all they give them are two crank batteries. That's not going to work. You need a deep cycle battery if you are going to run a secondary battery to run your accessories. Two crank batteries, they're not made for running low current for a long time. They're made for cranking over that vehicle and then running high current for your lights and things while the vehicle's running and sending power from the alternator to the battery. A voltmeter. You got to ask for a voltmeter. If you want to know what the battery's doing, you're going to need that voltmeter somewhere, and unless you ask for it, they aren't going to give it to you. The load disconnect. Now you mainly see this in mining vehicles, but I do recommend it if you are someone who fly in, fly out, you leave your vehicle at home for 2 weeks or in your stint while you're working, it's a good idea to have an isolation switch. So you just cut all the power from the vehicle and nothing is slowly drawing from those batteries.
Here's a prime example. If I'm leaving my vehicle in a space for a couple of weeks, I can turn this off and isolate the battery. That way, this battery is not going to get drained by my fridge in the back of the vehicle.
Because once you get back and you want to go on your trip because you've just been working all that time, the vehicle batteries may be depleted. And then you need to spend a day charging them, or maybe you will eventually drop a cell on your battery. Circuit breakers versus fuses. Now, depending on where you are mounting the circuit breaker or the fuse, you're going to want one or the other. Inside an engine bay, I highly recommend you stick to fuses, like MIDI fuses, those strong ones, just fuses. If you put a circuit breaker inside your engine bay and you do a trip to the northern part of Australia in the tropics, I guarantee you after a certain time, that circuit breaker is going to trip itself over because it gets too hot. It is an absolute nightmare. I've had that happen to myself, usually when it gets hot. Circuit breakers, more to do so for the back of your vehicle where there's none of this heat going on, and fuses towards the front. You can use fuses in the back too. We're talking do's and don'ts when it comes to dual battery systems. Do your research and planning thoroughly so you don't end up with problems while you're out here.
Don't!
Attempt to install a dual battery system if you have no idea about 12-volt electrics. Get the professionals to do it. However, all the information in this video you can use to see if they've done exactly what it is that you want. If they're trying to tell you otherwise to someone this advice, at least you can talk it through with them and they can explain why they might counter some of the advice that I'm giving you, because all situations can be different, so there might be some slight variance in what I'm saying for your needs.
Do it!
Do use the proper wiring, and when I say proper wiring, it's the proper gauge, the proper size wiring. Don't use speaker wires underneath your bonnet. There's a lot of heat here. You need proper automotive wire.
Don't!
Install a battery anywhere where there could be vibration or water or even like dust. Just put it somewhere nice and secure where it's going to be nice, strapped in and safe.
Here's an example of strapping your battery down, where it's nice and safe, nice and secure, not going anywhere.
Last thing you want is an electrical fire.
Do it!
Use fuses on absolutely everything.
Another tip when it comes to fuses, have them handy so you can get to them. For example, I flip my seat forward, I can get right in, I can change a fuse easy roadside, or I can flick one of these trip switches back over.
Normally, you only really need a fuse from where the power's coming from, but I just fuse both ends just to be safe. And if the wire size is correct, the fuse is going to do its job. If the wire size is too thin, too small compared to the fuse, the wire is essentially going to become the fuse. You don't want that. You want the fuse to be the fuse.
Don't do it!
Don't rely on crimp connectors alone. I highly recommend head shrink, solder, sheath it. Just don't rely on crimp connectors only.
Do it!
Do either label every single wire so you know exactly what it's for, or have a color chart or a roadmap of all your wires in your vehicle.
For this, I have a roadmap for, so if one of these blows, I'll know exactly where it's from, and then I can trace back to see why the fuse blew. Also makes it easy to replace.
Don't install a battery too far away from the battery charger. Generally speaking, and it should be in the manual as well if it's a decent manual and it's a decent gear you bought, the DC-DC charger or the battery management system or whatever it is you have should be no more than a meter away from your actual battery. It's also going to eliminate copious amounts of thick wire. So the closer you can get that charger to the battery, the better.
Battery charger is as close as it can possibly get to this battery. So there's no volt drop and it's within the recommended range.
Do it!
Do run a power stud from your crank battery to the opposite side. And the whole purpose of this is to keep the clutter away from that crank battery. You're going to get volt drop, you're going to get a big pile of spaghetti on that side. We're not making spaghetti here, we are making a clean engine bay. We want no volt drop. Get that wire, a power wire, big wire, come across around here to this side exactly like I've done here, and from here you can run all your driving lights, your rock lights, or whatever you want to run. Make like a nice little area that's easy to access as well with fuses. What you'll see on your screen right now are fuses run on top of the battery. Don't do that, because if you want to replace that battery, you're going to have to remove all that crap and then pull the battery out. Pain in the ass. So do it this way, not a pain in the ass. Don't choose cheap and incompatible parts with your battery system. If you're going to do a battery system and you're sort of looking at a particular brand, well, use everything from that brand. Don't use a bit of there, a bit of here, and a bit of from there, because you're mixing things up that aren't designed to actually work with each other. Also, for warranty claims, it's going to make it much easier.
Do it!
Do check your battery before you go on a big trip. You don't want this to be happening before you leave, because out there, if you can't jump start your car, you're going to be stuck. Finding this video very helpful for your situation? Well, be sure to subscribe, because you're going to help me as I'm helping you, and I can create more content that's going to help you further with your vehicle build. Also, check out the members if you're curious. That's another way to help out even more. In my hand I have some equations, and this is what the electrical stores will tell you, and we'll put them up there. That only really matters if you're a base camper. If you're a base camper, you want to know how long it takes for your batteries to charge, and do you have enough solar capacity to charge from, say, 20% up to 100%. If it takes about 8 to 10 hours, I reckon that's good enough. But if you're not a base camper, all this means nothing. Because when you are driving, you are charging at 25 to 40 amps. It's only going to take you roughly 3 hours to charge your lithium battery all the way to the top. For a camper who drives all day and camps at night, you really don't actually need any solar. Or do you? If you like to park your vehicle in the driveway and have your fridges permanently on, that's what I do, that's when you want to know these equations again. As long as those equations, or as long as the charge going into your battery is higher than what your fridge uses, for example, if your fridge draws 4 amps, it's roughly the average, and your solar can chuck in about 6 amps, you're good, because it's chucking in more than what your fridge is using. And overnight, when there's no sun in the sky and your vehicle's parked, the fridges are going to be running less anyway. That is all you really need to worry about. Today's not a good day to talk about solar because it's overcast. We've got the Trooper here, we got a Prado there. I have put solar panels on my vehicle because my battery capacity is smaller than what the Prado has, which has a 150 amp hour capacity. He uses that car all the time. He's on the road constantly, he's charging camera gear, he's doing a lot of stuff, making coffees, 2000 watt inverter. That for him is enough without any solar. He doesn't even have a solar blanket. That is a good example. I have 100 watts of solar on the roof, which isn't much really. However, it's enough to keep the fridges going without going into like a negative discharge. So it's kind of keeping it level if I'm not charging camera gear and whatnot. So solar versus battery size is important to get right, because if you get it wrong, you're going to regret it. So again, a good amount of battery power is around 100 amp hours of lithium. We've got to keep that in mind. We're talking lithium here. If you have AGM, you may be relying a bit more on solar. As I just mentioned in solar, we were mainly talking about lithium batteries. AGM, you need to rely more on solar. So what's the reason behind that? Well, the reason is with an AGM battery, the discharge rate, recommended discharge rate is only 50%. Once you go beyond 50%, you got a volt drop and the amps rise. It's not good for the battery. It can also incur cell damage on the battery, and AGM batteries don't last as long. As opposed to a lithium battery, you can discharge up to, on some of them, 95% power. That means you can get almost twice as much power out of a lithium battery as opposed to an AGM battery. Lithium batteries do cost more, but they will last 2 to 3 times longer than an AGM battery. In my experience, AGM batteries, 2 years, give or take. Lithium, 5 years plus. I mentioned the discharge rate. Wait till you hear this. A lithium battery charges 5 times faster than an AGM battery. It absorbs all that charge that your DC-DC charger is throwing into it. When it comes to solar, it doesn't really matter because the charge that the solar will put in is usually only about 8 amps, 10 amps, 12 amps. Both these batteries will absorb that with no problem, on par when they're charging from solar. And the last thing I want to cover, lithium batteries are probably about half the weight as opposed to an AGM battery. AGM batteries, 30 kilos, lithium, about 15, 16 kilos. I could go way more into depth, and if you want to know more about AGM versus lithium versus other types of batteries, comment down below. But let's keep moving. The best pro of them all, the lifesaver. You're out in the middle of the outback, your primary battery is dead because it's been overheated or it's just been drained because you ran a stereo all night. Don't fear, because you can press that battery link button and off you go, providing you have the battery link button installed, which most people don't actually have. This is only really achievable if you have 2 batteries under the bonnet, because if you have a battery in the back, like a house battery, you can theoretically jumpstart your vehicle, but you need a ridiculous size cable, which is going to add weight and a lot of cost and a lot of inconvenience running that cable back to the engine bay. If you have a house battery, carry a jump starter pack. It's just a better way. Having a dual battery system means that you don't have to worry about your primary battery. Say if you didn't have it, you're running your fridge off your main battery, which a lot of people do, and I'm actually currently doing in the Troopy. You can do that, but at a risk, because you need to keep the accessory on. So you got a radio running, which you can turn off, but you got other things running in the background, and then it's slowly draining your battery, keeping your food cold in the fridge. So having a dual battery system, you can hook up the fridge to the second battery, extend your time at camp and not worry about the primary battery. The ability to run all your 12 volt accessories, and we're not just talking about your fridges and things, we're also talking about your camping lights, your water pumps. So you got a water tank, you can now power a pump, which means you can have a shower out in the bush, and a lot of other little things that you can run 12 volts off, like charging batteries, charging tool batteries. There's so many things you can do with it. Charging your phone. Comfort and convenience. Your run time at camp is going to be extended because you have that extra battery running everything off it. Even better if you pair it up with a solar charger. So if you can charge it with solar out there, essentially you can stay there until you run out of either water or food. Better wiring and organization to a point. You have now a dual battery system which is either in the front or in the back. Depending on how it's wired up, it's now easier to fault find things, and also it's going to look a lot cleaner because you can run different loads of different batteries. If you have a dual battery system, you don't need to bring generators. Essentially, it can be cost effective providing you use it. You see, if you only camp once or twice a year and you have a generator already, it doesn't make sense to have a dual battery setup because you could bring that generator. Although you're going to be the most annoying prick around, making all that noise. So don't do that actually. And here are the cons. It costs quite a bit to have a decent battery setup. Or does it? You can actually do it at a really cheap price. However, to get a proper system that most people want, it keeps going up and up and up depending on what you're doing. If you're running 3 batteries, you've got a house battery with inverters and all this stuff, you could look from anywhere from a house battery setup being from 2,000 and up to 10,000 onwards. Not even kidding. Once you add all the hardware, you add all the labor, it's a very expensive exercise depending on what you want. So when I'm talking about decent battery kits, the more expensive end, this is a high quality one. This is pre-pressed, pre-loomed, with a DC-DC charger, pre-heat shrunk, pre-soldered, pre-cut to length, with some decent instructions that anyone can pretty much read and install this kit themselves. That is a decent kit, but you're looking at something that's just shy of $2,000. Sure, you can get far cheaper kits. You might just get a battery tray. You still have to find your own DC-DC charger. You still have to do all your own cutting and soldering and all that stuff. That's fine if you can do that, but you also have to add the cost of all these other components into it. And then you're going to have excess left over as well, and you won't have instructions because you're making it up as you go. There's a difference between a kit that's quality done and a kit you got to make up yourself. Unfortunately, this kit is only available for the 70 series, the 200 series, and the Hilux. The extra weight of adding batteries. For 100 amps of AGM, 30 kilos. Lithium, 16. 200 amps, just double it. And you can pretty much work it out yourself. On top of that, which most people forget about, is all the wiring and all the extra gadgets. No one worries about that. If you have a proper system set up, all the wiring and all the components are going to outweigh your batteries. Trust me. Having batteries underneath the bonnet, batteries aren't going to last that long. Even your crank battery will suffer more because you've filled the void behind it. Now there's less air that can move around. Most people add a battery towards the firewall of a vehicle, those batteries will last 1.5 to 2 years if you're lucky. So that is a major con. And it's also the reason why I would suggest to people not to put a lithium under the bonnet unless it's at the front. But even then, it's not proven enough for me to put a lithium battery underneath the bonnet. It just gets too hot. Complex system that you've installed, your Home on Wheels package, if you didn't install that, you paid someone to do it, not only has it cost you an extra arm and a leg and a kidney, and if something goes wrong out in the bush, if you don't have a diagram of where everything is, and even if you do have a diagram of where everything is, it is going to be near impossible to fault find on a complex system. On the other hand, if you do a DIY installation, you will find the problems a lot easier because you know where around the wire. But then it also comes down to your skill. If your skill's not that good, then you may have ESI at your own doing, electrical system issues. And having that out in the outback is not cool. Imagine being out in the middle of the bush and you got all your meats in the fridge and you have a case of ESI. That food is going to get spoiled if you don't find that fast. And if you're not careful, the ESI is going to lead to ISI, inconvenient starvation issues. Not sure if you need a snorkel for your four-wheel drive? What are they for? Well, they do so much more than what you think. Check that out right there. You want to know more about bull bars? Find that one right there too. Thanks for watching, guys. Be sure to subscribe. It's going to help me out. It's going to help me help you. Oh, and check out those top tier members right there. If you want to know more about YouTube members, well, check out the link below and you'll find out how to further support the channel and get some exclusive stuff